If you're sitting the UCAT this year and you're stressing about verbal reasoning, you are not the only one. This is the section which most people struggle with, and it's historically the one where people score the lowest. So how can you maximize your chances of scoring high in verbal reasoning? In this video, I'm going to go over my top tips for verbal reasoning as someone who scored highest in this section of the UCAT. This is the section where people start panicking, feel very slow, and even get distracted due to the high quantity of text and information being thrown at you. It's really important to answer accurately and quickly without falling for the typical traps that are set out in the exam. Verbal reasoning is not about reading every section in its entirety. It's about answering strategically and finding evidence quickly. In this video, we're going to go over skimming, how to read the question, keywords, synonyms, true, false, can't tell questions, educated guessing, common traps, reviewing mistakes, and what I would personally avoid if I were to sit the exam again. So first of all, let's go over why verbal reasoning is so difficult. The UCAT verbal reasoning section gives you 44 questions to answer in only 22 minutes. That is roughly 2 minutes per passage. Normal reading is about understanding everything, but UCAT reading is identifying evidence and figuring out what is relevant. A lot of students panic because they start reading from the beginning of the passage and trying to absorb every single sentence, remembering every minute detail. Then they end up rereading the passage or rereading the same sentence over and over again, trying to dissect whether or not that they missed something. Before you know it, the time has run out and you have to flag and skip. If this is you, it doesn't mean that you're bad at VR. It probably just means you're using the wrong technique. VR feels hard because it punishes normal reading habits. This section is made as a way to simulate what it would be like working in a clinical environment, going through a patient's notes, having to skim, identify what is relevant in a time-pressured scenario. In clinical practice, you will be presented with a patient case, and they will often have loads and loads of different notes, lots of recorded medical history, lots of documentation that the doctor will have to sift through. This section is testing you to see how you identify relevant information and how you ensure that it is accurate. Tip 1 is to stop reading every word. This will definitely feel uncomfortable at first, but it's something that you need to go along with. In VR, you need to stop reading the passage in its entirety as if it's something that you need to learn. You are not here to become an expert on that given topic. You are there to answer provided questions. So when you read, try to skip out filler words. Don't give unnecessary attention to every and, the, they, therefore, or long descriptive phrases, as these are oftentimes very unnecessary. You are looking for substantial words of meaning. Focus on stuff that carries information. That will be things like dates, names, locations, numbers, opinions, places, comparisons, results, causes, and contrast words. Keep an eye out for words like however, although, those contrasting phrases, because oftentimes they show a shift in meaning, and that can often trick people out. For example, if a passage says, many people initially supported the policy, however, later evidence suggested it had limited impact. The word, however, changes the direction of the entire segment, and your answer might depend on that second half rather than the first. This is where people get tricked out. So the goal isn't to read faster and panic. The goal is to read more meaningfully. Prioritize words that change meaning. Now let's move on to talk about skim reading, because I think that a lot of people misunderstand this. Skimming doesn't mean looking at the passage for a couple of seconds and hoping for the best, because that's simply not going to help you. Good skimming is not random, it is structured. This means that you're not reading every single word of the passage, rather you are reading enough to understand the shape and general tone of the passage. You need to know, what is the topic? What is each paragraph roughly doing? Are there any names, dates, studies, opinions mentioned? And where would I come back to in the passage if a question asked me about a certain thing? You are essentially creating a map in your brain, a sort of familiarization strategy to have an outline of that passage in your mind to come back to. An example of bad skim reading is when someone goes through the entire passage and takes away nothing. You might be staring at the words and taking in absolutely no information. A good skim would look something like this. Paragraph 1, I know that it introduces the topic. Paragraph 2 talks about the study. Paragraph 3 provides criticism. And paragraph 4 gives the conclusion. So do you see what I mean when I'm saying a good skim read will ensure that you have this map and you kind of know the rough idea of each paragraph or each section of the passage. That means if a question were to come up asking about criticism, you would know exactly where to refer to back into the passage. Should you read the question first or the passage first? For most VR questions, I would suggest reading the question first. The question gives your brain a target, something to seek out whilst you're going through the passage. Instead of reading passively, you know exactly what you're looking for. That could include keywords, locations, dates. If the question says, according to the passage, which of the following is true about the 2019 trial? Then you know your targets are 2019 and trials. However, I should mention that there are definitely exceptions to this. If it is a broad question like, which of the following statements best reflects the author's overall view, or which conclusion is best supported by the passage, then you'll probably need to have a quick skim of the whole passage first before answering. So my rule is quite simple. If it's a specific question, read the question first. If it's a broad tone or conclusion question, read the passage first. Moving on, I'd like to discuss a strategy I like for more of those difficult, longer passages. Do not force yourself to answer all the questions in the exact order given. You will definitely find that some questions are more challenging than others, and oftentimes it's better to flag, skip, and move on. By answering those later questions of the passage, you'll get a better idea of the passage itself, and that may help you answer that more difficult question. For longer comprehension style questions, I like to read all of the answer options as well, just enough to understand what the different answer options are testing. This gives you context and allows you to spot the wrong answers instantly, because then you'll be able to use the rule of elimination. For example, if all the answer options are about whether something increased, decreased, stayed the same, or was impossible to measure, you now know exactly what type of evidence you're looking for. Let's talk about keywords. Everyone always says look out for keywords, but what does that actually mean and how does it help you in the exam? This can sometimes be misleading because the UCAT often uses a change of wording in order to trick you. So I like to split keywords into two separate categories. First, there are irreplaceable keywords. These are things that cannot be swapped out easily, and that often include stuff like names, dates, proper nouns, percentages, numbers, and unusual or unique terms. If the question mentions like Florence Nightingale, 2018, 42%, those are very specific irreplaceable keywords that you can keep a lookout for. Use these as anchors. Second are your flexible keywords. These are ideas that can often be reworded. Benefit might become advantage. Positive outcome might be improvement. Reduced might become declined. So do not search for those exact keywords in this case, but rather search for things that are related. So you're looking at synonyms, you're looking for meaning. This is where students often fall into this trap because they'll often look through the text looking for a very specific thing about improvement, but it is phrased in a different way, so they have to keep rereading and rereading, therefore wasting time. Now let's have a look at true, false, can't tell questions because these can be tricky, and it's oftentimes the easiest place to overthink. True means that the statement is directly supported by the passage. False means that the statement is directly contradicted by the passage. Can't tell means that there's not enough information to prove or disprove it within the passage. So please don't bring in your external knowledge. Don't think that I know this from biology. I think that this is probably true. That's where you're going to lose marks. It has to be directly relevant and stated in the passage. A really helpful question to ask yourself when you're answering these types of questions is, can I point to the exact sentence that answers this? If yes, it may be true. If I cannot prove it either way, it is a can't tell. Please be careful with your outside knowledge here. Applicants can often get tricked out here because they see a familiar topic or something they've learned about previously and they think, oh, I know this, and then think that they're going to save time by answering the question based on their own external knowledge. However, the UCAT does not reward this. It has to be directly stated and supported in the passage itself. Now let's discuss common traps in the UCAT. Trap 1 is extreme wording. Words like always, never, all, only, none, impossible, or guaranteed need very strong evidence. If the passage says many participants improved, you cannot choose the answer that says all participants improved. There is a significant language mismatch here. Many does not equal all, some does not equal most. The passage might say, the program was introduced after many complaints from residents, while the answer might say, the program was introduced because residents demanded urgent action. This adds an extra layer of meaning. Complaints do not equate to urgent demands. The third trap I'd like to discuss is two-part statements. This is where half of the answer is true and the other half is false. For example, the study took place in 2018, but did it prove that this treatment was effective? If not, then the whole statement is wrong. Do not let a half-truth misguide your judgment. Trap 4 is scattered keywords. Sometimes the keyword will only appear in one paragraph of the passage. Other times it might be scattered throughout. Keep in mind that sometimes the answer is listed on the sentence before the keyword. So when you find that keyword in the passage, make sure you read around it. So that might be the sentence before and the sentence after, because these can change the meaning. Let's talk about similar looking options. Sometimes two options are close, but one is slightly more precise. Look carefully at verbs and quantity words. Suggested is not the same as confirmed. Contributed to is not the same as caused. Some is not the same as the majority. VR traps are usually tiny wording changes that throw you off. Be very strict with your language. You have about 2 minutes per passage set, but this is not a rule that you will hit every single time. Some passages you may work through quicker than others and vice versa. The important thing is not to spiral. If a passage is confusing, convoluted, and the first question is already taking too long, flag, skip, and move on and come back to it later. When you flag questions and decide to come back to it, put in an answer option anyway, because this will ensure you at least have a chance of scoring a mark, even if you don't have time at the end to come back to it. There is no negative marking in the UCAT exam. If you can rule out 2 answer options, that's great, because that will just leave you with 2 options to answer from, which improves your odds of getting the answer right. When in doubt, use the process of elimination if you can, and use your educated guessing. Also, if you notice that 2 answer options directly contradict each other, pay special attention. The answer is not always one of them, but the test is often making you decide between those 2 ideas. Use the passage to check which side is supported, if either. And please do not emotionally attach yourself to bad passages. If you're struggling, answer it quickly, flag and move on. This does not dictate the rest of the section. You will definitely find some passages a lot easier than others, and that's just the nature of the exam. So please don't let a bad passage or bad set of questions throw you off. Let's move on to talking about practice and what I would do if I started again. At the start, I would build confidence with the speed. This doesn't necessarily mean jumping straight into timed practice, especially if your technique is not there yet, because you'll just panic, choose a random answer option, get a bad score, and convince yourself that you suck at VR, which is not the case. Start with untimed questions initially to familiarize yourself with the process. Practice your technique, and then I want you to swiftly move on to timed practice. You can do the timed mini sets of questions to help you build confidence and practice your timing skills. Remember, practice makes perfect. Then start doing full timed sections closer to the exam. Think of it more like sprint training. You do not sprint at maximum effort all day, every day. You do short, focused bursts consistently, recover, review, and repeat. A good VR practice session doesn't need to be 3 hours long. It could be 45 minutes to an hour. That is so much better than doing loads of questions, getting a bad score, looking at it and feeling down, because you're not going to improve that way. Consistency is so key when it comes to the UCAT. It is vital. Reviewing your mistakes, seeing where you're losing marks, and practicing your technique. Outside of practicing directly, you can ensure that you're reading lots outside. So maybe before bed, you pick up a book, read for half an hour to an hour. This allows you to increase your reading speed and become more confident when reading through passages of text. If you use a platform like Medify or MedEntry, make sure to take full advantage of their skill trainers. Don't just spam full mocks. The most important thing is how you review. Let's talk about how best to review your mistakes. This is where people either improve or they stay stuck at the same scoring level. Doing endless questions without reviewing them isn't going to help you. because you'll likely make the same mistakes over and over again. Did I miss a keyword? Did I search for the exact word and then miss out on a synonym? Did I fall for extreme wording? These are the questions you need to ask yourself when you're reviewing your mistakes in VR. This is what will make your review useful. You'll then be able to identify patterns in your mistakes. Keep a tiny mistake log. Now this could be an Excel spreadsheet, this could be a Word document, just simply something that works best for you. I like to outline the question type, what went wrong, and what you will plan to do next time to improve or avoid this mistake. What do you do on test day? On test day, I advise not doing heavy practice at all. I think it's best to rest your mind 24 hours before the exam and just get your nerves maintained. However, I do advise that maybe you pick up a short article, read the newspaper, read a section of a book that you like, just something to help with your reading speed and your proficiency. Also, please make sure that you're well hydrated, that you've slept enough, that you've had something to eat, and you're ready to go. Don't practice so heavily the night before your exam or the morning of your exam, because this is just going to stress you out so much, overwhelm your brain, and likely not benefit you at all. And what would I personally avoid if I sat the UCAT again? I would definitely avoid reading the whole passage at a time, because this was such a waste of time and it's way better to go off that keyword technique. I would also avoid staying on untimed practice for too long. It's really important in the beginning to familiarize yourself using untimed practice, but then from there quickly move on to timed practice, because this section is so time critical. And please don't start changing your technique every 2 days just because you found a new hack online. You need to figure out what works for you, and if you find something that works, stick with it and remain consistent. Also, please avoid using outside knowledge. This is not going to help you, especially in those science passages. VR can really put people down because in a way it feels like it's testing your ability to read, but it's not. It's testing a very specific exam skill. Find evidence, avoid assumptions, be strict with your wording, manage your time well, review your mistakes, and that's it. It's not easy, but it is trainable. That's why consistency is so important. If this video helped, please save, share, like, and subscribe. I really appreciate your support. I have a playlist of other UCAT videos that you'll be able to find here. Feel free to reach out to me either on Instagram or leave a comment below, and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you as soon as I can. I love hearing from you guys, and I really wish you the absolute best with your preparation. Good luck, guys. You've got this. Thanks for watching. See you later. High five.